order, and we'll begin the meeting with the roll call, which is this all you will do this?
Sure. Roll call of holdover members. Judy Brady.
Here.
Mike Donato.
Here.
Megan Eshelman.
Here.
Richard Garber.
Here.
Linda Johnson.
Here.
Grant Keener.
Here.
Charles Maris.
Here.
Pat Wagner.
Here.
Justin Wogemuth.
Here. And we'll begin now with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 31 years. This is all.
Okay, so welcome to the members of the public. The purpose of this annual organization meeting is to organize the board for the coming year by electing a permanent president and vice president. As you can see from the agenda for the organization portion of the meeting, we will not take up the regular legislative business of the board at this point. Immediately following the organization meeting this evening, we will be convening a regular meeting for that purpose. There are no residents' requests to address the board this evening.
Okay, the first order of business is to elect a temporary president from the holdover members only, which is everyone, to chair the organizational meeting. May I have a nomination for temporary president?
I'd like to nominate Mrs. Linda Johnston as temporary president.
Second that motion.
Thank you. I have a first and a second.
Move that nominations be closed.
Thank you. At this point, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Motion carries, I believe, 9-0. So, Ms. Johnston.
You all have a draft copy of the list of the members of the board of the school district, the school directors for the year now beginning at your seats. Please review your information and confirm the accuracy of our school board recording secretary, Carissa Rhodes, this evening. Tonight's nominations and voting for the board president and vice president will follow Hempfield School District's Board Policy 005, organization, quote, election of officers shall be by a majority vote of those present and voting. Where no such majority is achieved on the first ballot, a second ballot shall be cast for the two candidates who received the greatest number of votes, end of quote. I will now open the floor for nominations for the office of president. May I have a nomination for board president?
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
I nominate Mike Donato for board president.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Are there any other nominations for the office of board president? I declare the nominations closed. As nominations are closed and there is only one candidate nominated, I move for Mike Donato's election by acclamation for the position of president. May I have a motion to approve Mike Donato as president?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. This is a voice vote. So does Mrs. Hall do that?
They can either raise their hand.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Raise your, let me think. Let's vote for Mr. Donato. Raise your hand if it's if you vote yes for him. Okay. So moved. The secretary will record those votes. With a vote of 9-0, Mike Donato has been elected as president. Congratulations, Mr. Donato. You all have a draft copy of the list. Oh, the other way? Oh, this one. Okay, sorry. Again? Oh, this page. I will now open the floor for nominations for the office of Vice President. May I have a nomination for Board Vice President?
I nominate Mr. Wagner.
Second.
Are there any other nominations for the office of Vice President? I declare the nominations closed. As nominations are closed and Pat Wagner is the only candidate nominated, I moved for election by acclamation for the position of Vice President of Pat Wagner. May I have a motion to approve Pat Wagner as the Vice President?
So
A second?
Second.
Raise your hands if you agree for this, for a vote. Okay. The secretary, that all nine to zero. The secretary will record the votes. With a vote of 9-0, Pat Wagner has been elected as Vice President. Congratulations. Pat. And that's it for me, right? Oh, one more formality, sorry. This page. I will now turn the meeting over to our new board president. Thank you, Mr. Donato.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnston. Moving on to number 5 on the agenda for this, the president's signature stamp. May I have a motion to authorize the use of the president's signature stamp until a new one is received? Not quite sure why
Mr.
we need a
President,
new
point
one.
of order of that is that agenda item is not necessary, so there's not been a change in the office of president.
Probably true. Okay, I agree. Yeah. So we'll move on. Approval of district resolutions to designate. This would be 6B, the list of banks, First National Bank, Fulton Bank, Pennsylvania School Liquid District, District Liquid Asset Fund, Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust. The following newspaper for general circulation is required by law, the LMP Media Group, and the regular schedule, which we received a copy of for our upcoming meetings. And the final thing in there is the meeting schedules for buildings and grounds and education programs, policy, personnel, and legal committee. So I need a motion to approve all of those items, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnston. Second?
Second.
Thank you. I think that was. Oh, thank you, Mrs. Brady. Okay, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, show of hands. Motion carries 9-0. And then next thing in here, number 7, this does require a board vote for appointment for the adjunct committees for Lancaster Career and Technology Center would be Mr. Keener and Mr. Garber as alternate. For IU13, Mr. Maris, Hempfield Rec, Mrs. Brady, and Mr. Wagner, Safety and Security, Mr. Garber, and PSBA, Mrs. Eshelman. So need a motion to approve those, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? And that carries 9-0. And then last part with this is the standing committees. There's no need to vote for that. There's a couple of changes on this from what's on there. For buildings and grounds, we're going, Mr. Garber and Mrs. Johnson is going to go off the committee, and Mr. Garber will be taking over on buildings and grounds. And the other change is on the Finance Committee. I'm going to go off of that, and Mrs. Johnson will take my place on there. Any other questions about this? Because this does not need a motion to approve. Okay. Then moving on, that was the last item. So need a motion to adjourn this meeting, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. All those in favor? Okay, carries 9-0. Organization meeting is adjourned. And with that, as soon as I get it up, we'll begin the regular board meeting. Okay, come on up, regular board meeting. Mine doesn't seem.
Mine's not loading either.
You want to go to the 24?
Just blank screen.
Okay,
And then go down to regular.
all right, there we go.
Scroll down on this.
So you can choose that, right?
No, I want to go with the agenda.
Click on view the agenda.
Okay. All right. I'm going to continue with the meeting. Call to order. Everyone is still present. We don't need to do the pledge again. The board did not meet in any executive session since the last board meeting. So next part of this will be approval of the agenda for tonight's regular board meeting, incorporating any additions or deletions.
So moved.
Thank you. Second.
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, I believe that carries 9-0. Okay, approval of minutes. That would be the minutes from the regular board meeting held on November 12th and the education programs, policy, personnel, and legal committee meeting held on November 21st, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. Second.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, I believe that carries 9-0. And we're going to go on to recognitions, and I'm actually going to start this first tonight for this part going on here. It's like prior to Thanksgiving break, I had an opportunity to visit all 11 of our school buildings with Mr. Bromersky. After visiting, I sent the following email to the building staff. I know this has been a difficult period of time for both our professional staff, our teachers and administrators, and our support staff. Today, my visit with Mr. Bromersky reinforced what I knew is occurring each day in our schools. Regardless of your role, you create the best possible environment for your students to learn. More importantly, visiting today reminded me that your students are experiencing success and thriving. Thanks for all you do and all your roles to contribute to the success of our students. You make a difference in their lives every day. I like to think of schools as being a piece of cake. The icing on the cake is all the activities that occur outside the school day, the plays, dances, concerts, art and talent shows, athletics, and so on. The cake is the school day. You can have great icing, but if the cake is stale, the piece of cake is no good. I could tell you from my visits, nowhere is the cake stale. Our students are experiencing success and thriving in all our buildings. Here's a quick example of some of the things I saw during my visits. An aide, this was in elementary school, an aide working with a group of first graders learning addition and subtraction facts. The students were eagerly engaging with the aide to complete the activity. A third grade team of teachers meeting with all their students to begin a wit and wisdom unit on the space and moon. When we arrived in the building, the third grade team of teachers invited Mr. Bromersky and I to come and observe. They did not know we were coming. We watched the students in small groups begin preview activities with the books they will be reading in the unit. The students jumped right in and began the book review activities. In another elementary building, observing an elementary band teacher giving a lesson to a group of trumpet players. I know very little about music, but I was able to figure out from the teacher's lesson the section of music they were playing. And Mr. Bremersky has played an instrument, and he was able to verify to me that I had picked out the right thing. So I thought the teacher was doing a tremendous job. Middle school students learning how a design program works in tech ed, which they will use to help design their CO2 powered cars they will be making. In a middle school, watching a Millersville art major having great interactions with her middle school students as they were working on drawing their faces while looking into a mirror in art class. That's difficult to do. Observing middle school students having fun and acting like middle school students in both middle school cafeterias on a Friday when it was snowing outside. Watching a high school student walk up to our high school SRO while he was eating lunch in the high school cafeteria and giving him a fist bump. Walking around the high school metal shop, observing students complete projects they created. The students were working hard, and when I talked to them, they were eager to tell me about their projects. I could go on, but what's important, the cake is not stale. Our students are learning and growing. I want to thank our professional and support staff for not allowing the cake to get stale. You are making a difference in our student lives each and every day. I want to especially thank Mr. Bremersky. Shortly, the board will be voting on the collective bargaining agreement with HEA. Mr. Bremersky received a lot of blame for the tenure and length of negotiations. That's unjustified blame. The collective bargaining agreement is between HEA and the board, not Mr. Bremersky. His role was to provide the board with information and suggestions when the board asked for them, and that's exactly what he did. He did nothing to hinder the negotiation project, and in fact, helped the board reach the tentative agreement we will be voting on shortly. Thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bremersky.
No, I'm sorry, what did you just read? Was that a letter that you got or
No, I wrote it.
what?
I wrote it.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
Okay.
All right. I didn't hear the beginning of it.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're going to turn it over to our student council. Alex, am I starting with you or Sophia? Sophia, okay.
One event we've done recently is the food drive. So that's where the students from Hempfield donated food items to their first period teachers and for the food drive. And then we as student council last Monday collected all the items from the classrooms. We sorted them into boxes and cans and bags. And then we took our own cars and transported them to the Zion Lutheran Church. And then from there, we helped to unload it. And the staff there were really helpful. They gave us a tour and they helped better our understanding of how the food drive works. So that was the process of the food drive.
I'm Alex. I'm the vice president right now. And so overall, we collected 2,192 pounds of food for the food drive, which is a really impressive number. And we're so grateful to all the students and teachers who donated or gave money or anything through clubs or classrooms. Mr. Brenneman's class had 289 donations. So we think that they were the highest participator in that. So we're really grateful to them. Something else that we did was the variety show. So we had tons of acts of all different types of talents, and we had singing, we had dancing, we had tumbling. So we're really grateful to everyone who came out and supported that. And the acts were just amazing. I mean, I was watching them and I was super impressed. Student council, we had to go to all the rehearsals and auditions, and every time I saw the act, I was impressed, no matter how many times I'd seen it. We also did a basket raffle at intermission for that. So when people got tickets, they just put them into a basket, and I think that was pretty successful. So we gave out those baskets that night. Yeah, we're looking forward to, we'll be putting together our dance for, I think it's in February of this year. So we're excited to put work into that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for sharing the great work that you continue to do at the high school. And thank you for all the student council members who are here tonight in support of your colleagues and your peers in the high school.
Can I say a few words about the variety show?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. I was able to attend, and
like you said, I was not surprised at all by the talent. I was like blown away, but I was surprised at the guts of I think you were up there, of the guts of a lot of the people that were up there. I could never do that. It was awesome. And I just thought it was a great night for Hempfield, and I wanted to take an opportunity to thank everybody who was involved, obviously the performers, but you could tell the student council members, their advisors, like the stage crew and everybody in the background was like doing all the stuff. All those, the hosts for the evening were awesome and like went with the flow of the audience so well. And the teachers for their surprise performance, which was awesome. And so I just want to thank you guys for the invite, because you always come here and invite us to things. And like I said, it was just a really great night for Hempfield, a lot of fun. And I could tell everybody and the audience members had a great time. So that was really cool. Yeah, thanks.
Sorry. Chris.
Added some music.
Sorry.
And I will, because I volunteered Hempfield Food Bag, thank you. And I'm glad you got a tour of it. And I know they appreciate, I haven't been there volunteering yet this month, but I know they appreciate getting all the stuff put in boxes, things, because it makes it a lot easier to distribute it around. And I will tell you that on average, it's approximately 100 families we feed per week. And I think they figure the size of each family being about 4 people. So it's at least 400 people each week, Hempfield people that are being fed by the food bank. So again, thank you for doing that. It is appreciated with it. And 2,000 pounds plus is a lot of food. But that was fun. But that took a lot of cars to get it over there.
All right. Well, thank you to our student council. As always, you're welcome to stay unless you need to leave. Thank you.
And next is the residents' request, and we don't have any residents' requests, so we're going to move on to back to you for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Just 2 quick announcements before we jump into the actual report. First, I want to thank our board members and community members who helped out with the Junior Achievement STEM Summit at the high school. That was after our last board meeting. It was a phenomenal event for 2 days with all of our 9th graders. And also just a reminder that tomorrow is the holiday chape in the Franklin Gym. It's always a wonderful event tomorrow morning. So if you are available, please come out, see our students and the great projects that they've created that they are also selling for some holiday gifts. And then with that, because we did not have the Building and Grounds Finance Committee meeting, we are going to move the information that we were going to share at that meeting, because we were able to get some additional information as was requested for things around like the stadium, enrollment, CES, et cetera. So we're going to walk through just several slides to kind of provide some updates, provide some background, talk about some things that we learned. Our team members from KCBA, Mike Kelly is here tonight. And then also from Fidavia, we have John Michael and Maddie is here as well. So if you want to come on up to the table. Kim James is also here tonight as Director of Building and Grounds. Please come up as well. In case there's any questions or conversations for any of you from our board members. So tonight, while Karen and I will facilitate some of this, we will also have some of our team members from Fidavia and KCBA joining us. So Mike, if you can just go to the next slide. So some of the things we're going to talk about, we'll start off with enrollment projections, a little bit around Centerville Elementary School. There were questions around the work that needs to be done at the stadium. And Fidavia team was able to gather that information, provide some approximate costs and look at some options there. As you've heard at prior meetings, high school options that have been presented, we'll go back and review some of those. And then we have internally, administratively reviewed them, looked at options, looked at pros and cons, come to some consensus and some recommendations for the board to consider. And then we'll also look at borrowing, debt services, and potential tax implications as a result of that. So I'll kick it off with enrollment projections. So we are still working on the residential development research with our enrollment company. They have reached out prior to these meetings to East Hempfield, West Hempfield, checking in with the boroughs as well, with Mountville and East Petersburg, just to make sure that they had the most updated information with regards to new development that is on the books in all of those different areas. One of the things that we have worked as we're working through is trying to make sure that Power School has the most updated information. And what we have found in working with particularly West Hempfield is West Hempfield in the last 2 years or so hired a planner as part of their team. And she has been working and providing us a lot of detailed information. And prior to what we have today, a lot of the projects that were either conceptual ideas or possibilities that weren't necessarily on the books or started the process were included in prior projections. And after talking with her, she has removed them because while they may be conceptual ideas, it has not gone before supervisors, it has not been, approved in any way. So some adjustments were made, which is why we took that information back to Power School so that they could relook at the projections for future enrollment for us. East Hempfield always provides information to us in a very timely manner, which is great. One of the things that we found Power School is they did not necessarily transfer all of the data that East Hempfield provided. So some of those updates are being made to date. With that said, we know that there are at this point less projected new dwellings compared to what you have seen as a board or what we have shared in prior reports and prior presentations. So what that ultimately means is that has the potential for fewer new students in our future. And so what we want to get are those conservative and moderate projections from Power School. We have historically followed and when you look at our actual numbers, more on the conservative numbers that Power School has projected. And so we want to get those numbers to really look and see. Some of the things that we are starting to see are in terms of kindergarten, in some cases, fewer kindergarten students, but it's more connected to a lower birth rate in the area, which potentially has the impact for us to see fewer kindergarten students moving forward. That could change at some point if we work to expand, which we've, have been some preliminary conversations, conceptual ideas around that notion of full day kindergarten, but that could be a draw for families because right now we have half day kindergarten. So parents coming to us who want that full day and we don't have it, they tend to seek private kindergarten at some point.
I have a question. Have we looked at our first grade numbers as more of a realistic because of the half day? I'm thinking of my situation. My son didn't attend kindergarten here.
Kindergarten and first have historically looked pretty similar over the last several years. It's more of our second grade numbers actually where you start to see an increase. So that's been kind of interesting to watch. Some of the major unknowns when it comes to the enrollment projections is really looking at new students coming from existing dwellings. Because when you have new dwellings come on the books, we can actually estimate kind of the approximate number of students coming from those new homes. However, we don't always know what that turnover is going to look like with an existing dwelling. So that's definitely an unknown. One of the things that we're trying to look at and trying to see in terms of tax roll, the transfer of those taxes, what does that look like in kind of some annual trends in terms of some existing dwellings to kind of see if that potentially can open up some projections for us. The other piece that is always an unknown is when there's open land, whether or not someone will go to the supervisors at the local townships or boroughs and try and seek additional developments. So that is something that's always an unknown until it actually hits those meetings and starts to get on the books from a planning process. I will say over the last several years, working with East and West Hempfield has been great getting the information very timely, but also being part of the conversations around what impact will this potential new dwelling or these new developments have on the school district. They are asking for our input. They are asking for our voice, and being part of those conversations has been crucial as we're looking at the developments of new dwellings. All of that said, we know there were, so that information will be coming as soon as we get it in our hand from Power School. But there were questions around, particularly with Centerville Elementary with regards to previous feasibility study, work that needs to be done. What could we really do there? What should we do based on the numbers? And if, as expected, we start to see some fewer enrollment numbers in the future, it would be prudent in some time, not necessarily today, to maybe look out the next couple of years, 5 to 10 years, to see what is the true need from enrollment and is there a possibility of absorption through other schools. But for right now, as we've been looking at this internally, and unless something drastically changes with the enrollment numbers, what we would be suggesting to the board would be to maintain the building, address the needs as they come up. For example, the things around MEP, the roof, and the building envelope to help sustain that building for a period of time. looking at what would be cost effective, and we'd be working with our team members to kind of identify some of those priority projects from a dollar value standpoint, so that we have the space as needed, and then reevaluate as we get some future enrollment projections to determine if indeed we need to maintain our current structure, or do we need to look at something different? When you go back and look at the feasibility studies that were done, while Centerville Elementary was on the list, so were LPC and LMS in terms of work that needs to be accomplished. And so some conversations we've had, we believe at this point that we'd be able to maintain the building, being prudent with some of the decision-making in terms of what to do in terms of replacing or things around the roof and MEP and building envelope, et cetera, that it would serve us well to reevaluate, like I said, in 5+ years. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I want to make sure I understand what I'm
Yep.
hearing here. So the administration's recommendation is now to do nothing with Centerville other than just,
Address the
kind of-
needs of the buildings, yes.
okay. But a couple months ago, we saw a presentation that said that was filled with critical deficiencies in that building.
So there are pieces
And
around
that was
roof.
the term that was used.
Yep.
Critical deficiencies.
Yep.
So what has changed?
What has changed was from looking at enrollment, it's possible, the possibility of not necessarily needing all of the space we have if enrollment continues on a trajectory downward. However, if we make that decision now, we could be spending a lot of money on something that wouldn't necessarily be for the right size and scope of what we would need.
So would the thought maybe be to sunset Centerville at some point and redistribute those students to other buildings? Is that?
Or you look at the size of that building and do you go larger if need be, based on enrollment projections. So because of the possibility of the lower enrollment moving forward, it's something that would make the most sense in our opinion. And as we've looked at some of the work that needs to be done, from the cost standpoint, it would help prolong the building at this point by taking care of those critical areas of the roof, MEP, and any work in the building envelope, some of the repointing, some of the brickwork, to help kind of prevent some of the water infiltration at this point.
Thank you.
So it just sounds like the enrollment numbers, like bringing in more information has,
That's really going to be
Determine-
the determining factor for the longer term look at the elementary and structure of the schools at that point. But because of the fewer dwellings, that will have an impact on enrollment projections. And so when we looked back at the feasibility studies, it continues, again, the high school and the rest of the district, kind of two paths. The high school still continues to be the standout building, needing the most critical work at this point. There were other questions, if you go to the next slide, Mr. Graham, around the stadium, because we know there's work that needs to be done in the stadium, given the age of the facility. And when you are in the stadium, things like the lights, the press boxes, the bleachers, bathrooms, concessions, et cetera. So, John, I'll turn it over to you. Just kind of talk about what you saw, and then we have the list on the next slide, and then 3 possible options.
Sure. So, we walked the site, we went through, took all the concerns, we went through with Kim, Randy, and also the principal, and just tried to itemize that. And it was, I believe, Mr. Garber, you had mentioned a few meetings ago, like, hey, the stadium really needs to be looked at in here. What we found was nothing is up to code anywhere, not even close. Everything needs work. Everything is undersized. You've got, you're working with porta potties, multiple areas of the building. I understand visiting teams have to go to the middle school to get ready for games. Your bleachers on either side, or while they're in good shape, like there's no safety issues per code at that time. They're nowhere near up to current code in terms of railings, guardrails, gaps in between. Press boxes were in pretty rough shape, one more so than the other. So we did put together a bit of a chopping list of, we could fix this, we could upgrade that, and then this would be a comparable cost to replace, just to give you some kind of a starting point, an idea of a direction to go forward on that. I would caution that there may be a situation where if we try and do just the absolute minimums, we might get pulled into doing a little more. Like the way it works, and I'm sure Mike could speak to this well. When you have all these different buildings and everything is well behind on code, a lot of times the code officials, the plan reviewers, as soon as you start upgrading stuff, once you get over, is it 30, typically 30 to 40%, they then want everything brought up to code. So we just have to keep that in mind as we look at these numbers and some of these different options. Okay, so first we address some of the lighting. The stadium lighting and controls, this was requested. This is using the existing poles and bases, but putting far more modern LED heads and complete new controls on. And then adding parking lot lights. There are none there. The lot there at the stadium by the tennis courts behind the field house has no lights now. Because we put together a budget to actually put some parking lights there. The home press box was in pretty good shape, actually, like structurally, it appeared to be. It's just looking really rough and had like an old window air conditioner. So we kept that pretty simple with floor, ceilings, and maybe a little mini split system to take care of heat or.
Question. You skipped over stadium turf and track upgrades. I think our track has just been refinished.
Mhm.
And our turf, where's
has.
our turf at?
Yes, it has. However, we want to always be keeping in mind that is something that is continually needing to be replaced and or coded. So we wanted to make sure that you do keep that in mind. While it's not due right now, there are, 5, 6, 7 years down the road,
Okay.
you're gonna start having to replace some of
So
those
it's a line
things.
item for the future.
Right.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure at the time. And I was a little late in getting this together because we did the walkthrough, we did the homework, we took everything off, but then we actually had several school districts having bids come in for stadium upgrades. So I was delayed. I wanted to see those numbers. I wanted to get some good real-time numbers from districts in this area.
What
that
is
have-
what is the age of our turf? That's something I don't
I think
know.
it was just a couple years old.
It's only a few years old.
Okay.
So
So we should be good in those two, at least for the foreseeable future.
oh, yeah, and a resurface, a straight
Okay.
resurface is usually 85 to 90,000. That's pretty consistent.
The next thing that would have to happen to the turf would just simply be a recoding. We
Mhm.
don't have to take it down to the gravel again like we did just a few years ago.
Okay, thank you.
So like I said, on the home press box, the visitor press box, it's pretty rough. Like it's pretty rough. So we went with getting rid of that masonry structure that it's supported on. There's some old unused buildings underneath. It's a mess, and actually put in a pre-engineered press box on a stand. So that would actually be the sum of those two numbers, to replace the visitor press box.
Hey, our home press box is, you look at that, that's
Yeah.
not in real good shape, is
It's
it?
on there.
I've been in that.
Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, I did touch on that. I mean, again, we just looked at replacing the finishes. Structurally, it looked pretty good. And putting like a mini split system in, keeping it simple to handle the HVAC needs. On our walkthrough, I thought structurally that was okay. And again,
Size wise, is that comparable to other press boxes in the county? Seems really small to me.
on the home side,
Yeah,
oh, I don't know. I didn't think so. I think it was like 8
Okay.
by 24.
I'm just
I mean,
asking the question.
yeah, I've seen bigger and also smaller, so I don't know.
Okay.
It's hard. I don't know if there's a standard size for, high school press box. They seem to come in all over the place on size.
Okay, thank you.
And forgive me, why is there a press box on both sides? Because a lot of stadiums only have one press box.
That is correct.
So why do we need one on both sides?
It was requested that we look at it. I don't know that you have to have one on both sides.
That was my question. Why do we need?
If we were doing just one on the home side, we would need to make that one larger. Because there are folks from both the home team and
Right.
the away teams that do sit in the press
Right,
boxes.
which
So
makes,
that one would have to be made larger than if you wanted to go with just one.
okay, so what would the price be expanding the home field one, since it's in good shape? Expanding it a little bit and then not worrying about the one on the visitor side.
I think that's a good point that Grant's making.
Pardon me?
I think that's a good Yeah, I think that's a good point you're making, and we want to, this is preliminary, understand, but I think that might make more sense to expand the home press box and forget about the visitor, maybe demolish that.
Oh, we would need to, or we would want to get rid of, if we would do something like that, we would want to get rid of the structure on the away side.
I think, I mean, our team could look at it again, but I think you'd actually have to replace the home side then.
Correct.
Because those are prefab units. So money wise, you might be similar. I'd have to crunch some numbers. You know, in other words, if you just take the money for both and put it into a new home press box.
I think what would be helpful as we have these discussions is the board should not have to sit here and kind of freestyle this stuff in a meeting.
Well,
Like, these are the type of alternatives that we need you to bring to us ahead of time. Like, you can either demolish the whole, you can either demolish the visitor side and we can use the home side and expand it, and that's gonna be this cost, or you can do this other thing. It's more helpful, I think, for us if you come to us with these ideas rather than having a bunch of lay people who don't know engineering and construction try to imagine these questions at the last minute.
Well, we did kind of summarize 3 different options that take different
Yeah.
combinations of these. And I don't know if you want to go to that, but we thought
Yeah.
that would probably just bring up a lot of questions in between, that being able to see some of the items broken out might be helpful.
Yeah.
Right. And this was just initially what's needed, if you look
Yeah.
at it as is today. It wasn't if we were to do this or if we were to do this. So just looking at what we had
That's what
today.
We need alternatives.
I understand, but we're not there yet, as Ms. Johnson shared, but the request was simply, if you look at the stadium, what are the needs and what
Mhm.
work needs to be accomplished to upgrade it? And so that's what was done. In terms of the design or what we could do beyond that would be obviously future meetings. This is just informational to say, it was looked at, here's some ballpark numbers, and we can move forward at that point.
In defense of them, this is a first stab at it. I don't think we've looked at the
It's nothing
stands.
final.
This the first, so we're kind of looking,
Correct.
hey, these are preliminary things, and we'll obviously fine tune this down the road, but it sounds like they're gonna look at alternatives in the next couple slides too.
And
Yep.
take it all in and review it and then go back and ask those deeper questions or those option questions. This is more just the big picture.
What you gave us for the high school was great. You gave us 4 different options.
Right.
And I think that's,
Where
at least for me, that's what's more helpful.
Yeah, I
if you go to the
understand.
next- If you just go to the next.
There
slide,
are
you'll see.
a lot of little
Right.
moving pieces to what you have going on over
Yeah.
at the stadium though. So here, some scenarios were put together, okay? And as you see, at the bottom, the total, and then everything they have highlighted is what this brings in. This brings in the lighting. This brings in simply upgrading the box, only renovating the bathroom in the field house. And I just want to make a statement there. When you bring those two facilities are tight. I'm sure you guys know that they're really tight for space. They're not anywhere close to ADA compliant. So by just renovating those 2 buildings, if you make them ADA compliant, you're actually going to lose space. You're going to lose number of stalls. And with the field house, you could just get rid of that shower because the principal said nobody even uses it. And you could probably use that space to gain what you need for ADA and retain your lockers. But in the standalone bathrooms, you're gonna lose stalls. So then we looked at what would be needed to actually bring them up and get enough space so that you could get rid of the porta potty situation you have everywhere.
I think one option to throw out, and I'm just kind of thinking like Grant is, and this is preliminary, but would it make more sense to just level that bathroom and put a new one in versus trying to renovate it? Those bathrooms are not very big, and quite frankly, they're a horrible condition. Would it make sense just to level that building and put a new restroom in it?
It's certainly possible. And so this is like kind of the minimum to fix the worst of the worst, bring you up to code. And you know, again, if we go to the next scenario 2, okay, now this one renovates those bathrooms, but puts additions on, which is like a middle step. So I know I've sat before you guys many times, and if I only have a minimum and a maximum, you kind of want to see what the middle is too. So this is a little bit of a middle. What this has done is take the last one and do significant additions to both of these buildings. Okay, both the bathroom and this would allow you to now have your visiting team at the field house with the home team. So this kind of puts you in that mid-range, but you've gone from 5.7 to 9.6. And then let me just stop here 1 minute. And under the home grandstands, and this was not included in any of the scenarios, but just keep in your mind, there's a 200-seat addition extension. Principal said there's not enough bleachers. There's simply not when he has the band in there. And he was looking at like portable trailers or just looking at different options. So we threw that in. So that's what that is. You actually don't have quite enough seating for some of your games. So that's kind of a separate standalone item. And then the third scenario we did, now this is bathrooms, renovations, additions. And we were asked, what would it cost to just replace the grandstand and press box assemblies? So this is the Cadillac, just to give you some comparison. Now you're getting new bleachers in a sufficient quantity, new press boxes, and then you see what happens to the price there. And that was all we wanted with this initial meeting, was to kind of give you some idea about the money that could potentially go into renovating the stadium.
I do have a question. For this additional stadium seating, you're talking about something that's fixed, not a portable, correct?
We
was
scaled it off, and
confused.
we think that you could fit an addition onto the home stands.
So it would be permanent.
Correct.
Okay. No, I am not in favor of any portable stuff out there.
Yeah, we
it's
thought you could
some-
fit 150 to 200 seats
Okay.
additional on the one side.
And this isn't addressed here in just, I know we've talked about sound system at different times, but that's a totally separate project, correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Yep, so you had asked just for costs, kind of ballpark, what does this look like? Obviously, if this was a project, we'll have to do at some point. A lot more work will go into the design, the scope, what we're going to do, the conversations that will start at Building and Grounds Committee and then come back to the full board. But we wanted you just to see, because that was a request in terms of numbers. The next piece, just to follow back up on with the high school project, as Mike shared at a previous meeting, there were 4 options. We'll call them option 1, 2, 3, and 4. It's what we kind of decided on internally. Instead of letters, numbers, kind of mixing them, just stick with the numbers. So option 1 was just to renovate the existing school. Ballpark 131 million. Renovate and expand, that was 2 additions being added, 181 million. Replace the entire Franklin side and renovate Buchanan, it was 211 million. And the new building was 255. So internally, administratively, as a larger team, we've been kind of looking at pros and cons of the options, what we thought would be best. And when we looked at all the pros and cons, obviously we took off the new construction of a new school because we know that that was not financial option when you look at a borrowing capacity. When you look at just renovating the existing school, going down to option 1, $131 million. One of the things that we talked about internally was the fact of if you borrow and spend that money to renovate the existing school, you're still setting up future boards in the district in the long run of not being able to necessarily maintain all buildings. And you're ultimately going to have to do something with the high school building at some point in more recent, in the next several years, particularly on the Franklin side. So then we were between kind of option 2 and 3. And when you're already up to the 181 million, 30 million more, getting a lot more, there was a lot of discussion internally. Generally, it came to consensus that we would recommend the board consider discussion around to replace the Franklin and renovate Buchanan. We know that there's questions in terms of financing, but one of the pieces that is something to maintain, to think about is what are we gonna be able to do to set up the district long-term? In that if you're going to invest the dollars, how do we do this in a way that allows the district to continue to maintain and work on the high school while maintaining other buildings and facilities? And that really has to be the balance. So as you look at those 2 options, it's possible there could be some combination of them depending on what the design of the scope is. But for the next stage of the process, in order for us to be able to start taking things kind of out to the community and soliciting additional feedback, we need to give a direction to KCBA in terms of what that next step would be in terms of conceptual drawings and how to start having those conversations and continue some additional planning work prior to the board officially voting on any option. But as we looked at it, a lot of discussion over the last several weeks. That's where the general consensus came in. And just to go through some of the next slides, just as a refresh, what it would mean in terms of that academic addition. This is the current aerial. That's what it would look like. You see the Franklin side that's on the upper part of that would then ultimately disappear. This would be the new addition. About 60% of the building would be new, 40% would be maintained. And then you can see it from the Franklin side, it would go away. That would become the parking lot. You can see another side entrance. The white triangle represents existing building. So from a public standpoint, we are not able to show from safety and security side of things, but that's just the current makeup of the Buchanan side. But what you see is the uncovered spot would be, in a sense, draft ideas of new and what that could look like in terms of adjusting classes, adjusting locations of band, orchestra, chorus, FCS, library, classrooms, health suite, counseling suite, administration, tech ed, cafeteria, gym, etc. This would be in a sense, the second floor, more classrooms, see art, and then the third floor, additional classrooms, and what that would look like. So part of this definitely is a question that has come up in terms of borrowing. So Mrs. Hall has been back and forth with financial advisors, has provided information before, but Mrs. Hall, turn it over to you.
Sure. Next slide. So this is a chart, the next two that you've seen before. This one is it's 210 million. It's 211, but we had the 210 chart phasing in millage over the next 5 years. We initially had looked at 4. Right now we're looking at 5. And just to give you an idea of how much we'd have to build in each year to pay back this debt. That's assuming that the value of the mill stays the same and that we don't have significant growth in our tax base. Next slide.
Can you put up side by side the old projection and the new one? Because these numbers are they're very different than numbers that I have from.
Do you have a
previous-
4-year projection? Is that what you're looking at?
This is the 5-year
This is
grant.
5
That's
years.
why it's different. It's 5 years building up the tax
And did
base.
the old one run out to 2053 as well?
You give me a minute, I'll tell you.
So this runs out now to 2053. Was that?
I got it. Correct. The 4-year phase in for 210 million goes out to 2053.
To when?
2053.
Okay.
So just so you can see what that looks like against the projected Act 1 index over the next 5 years and what that leaves us in taxing authority. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like, that it takes up, well, I mean, less than half of what the index is proposed to be, or projected to be.
So with that then, I want to just open it up for board discussion, thoughts, ideas, and is there general consensus or direction to provide Mike and his team at KCBA to begin phase 2 of this project in terms of being able to bring additional stuff back to us to then ultimately take to the community for more discussion?
I wanted to echo what Mr. Bomerski said. And really, when you look at the hybrid option, which is the $211 million option, Mike Kelly has told us lifetime, probably around 75 years, straight renovations at 131 million. Yeah, it's a lot cheaper than last 25 years. You look at the time value of money, it's dramatically different. It's a no-brainer, in my opinion, to go with a higher one, even though it's higher cost. The ultimate cost per year that we're spending on that high school, including interest, is substantially higher for the renovation. And in 25 years, what are you doing next?
Yeah, I would agree. If you're making a short-term decision, you go with the 25 years. If you're making a long-term decision for the district, the cost of the $211 million project is absolutely clearly the better financial decision if we can make that work. I do think that requires a continued commitment to putting dollars away to soften the blow to the taxpayers. People have been extremely critical of the amount that we've put in our savings account, as I call it, for capital projects. That savings account will help to buffer the tax increase when we have to pay on this debt. There's a purpose and a method to that. If you don't do that, you can run up against the ceiling of the tax increase and run into some real financial problems. So wisely enough, at least in the last few years, this district's been willing to set some money aside. So you gradually begin to pull from that fund so that you're not hitting the taxpayers with a maximum amount. So you're gradually increasing taxes rather than, or gradually holding taxes steady rather than having spikes in taxes to pay additional debt. To me, hands down, I think everyone here knows where I stand. I don't mince words. The 211 is absolutely the best decision. When it was at 230 something, I will admit it wasn't affordable. We were 20 million over. So being able to get it down to the 211 has made it affordable. And the fact that we've committed to put some money aside will make it possible for us to do that and consider an appropriate option for the stadium work that needs to be done. And maybe if we can wrap that in together, it will help some of those costs too.
Plus, I believe those calculations were done with 4% interest bond. If I remember correctly, Karen. And there is a chance that some of those bonds maybe will come in a little lower.
Yeah.
So it could be even better.
So I guess have a kind of a question kind of this. So we go this option, it gives us no buffer zone, right? So we got to 211, some with difference of cost of different projects coming in lower, right? We know that. But we also took our contingency down, right? We shortened our buffer. We shortened a lot of things to make the numbers work. My concern is, as we go down this path, 2 years down the road, prices go up 0.5%. Now we're up to another $10 million, right? So what are we going to do if it does come in? Like, what are we going to do? In 2 years from now, we're down this path. Can we absorb that additional $10-20 million cost?
Mike, you can speak to that.
Sure, that's a great question. Within that 211 are multiple contingencies. So there's a 5% contingency sitting there, knowing things are going to be more expensive next year, or let's say in 18 months when the project is bid. We know that, so we included that in what we think will be the cost of the project. Then there's a construction contingency saying, all right, here's what the numbers will be on bid day, but there's going to be things that we find, especially in Buchanan, as we're doing some work in there. There may be some things that we find. So there's an additional large amount of money sitting there for any issues and things that may come up along the way. Typically, you don't want to spend, even half that, but it's there in case something happens. So there are some challenges and some stopgaps or safety nets, I should say, along the way. Meanwhile, there's a year of construction. There's a year of other projects. There's a year of a lot of other things that are going to be bidding. We talked about Pennsbury, that'll bid in September next year. So, we're through a presidential election. Here comes 25. We'll find out where everything kind of lands in 2025, and we'll know that in September. So if things are escalating faster than we think, then we can come back and start to pull the building in a little bit. So we have that time to work with you to make sure that if 211 is the budget, that's the ceiling, and we're not going to go above that. And make sure that we can adequately provide the amount of spaces and the quality of construction that you are looking for within that package to build a large enough addition to essentially take down the Franklin wing. And as a number of people have said, really kind of set that building up for a long future.
So do you,
Mike, I think this might be worthwhile. You and I had talked, and you mentioned that construction inflation has dropped off in the past year or so. So the projections for construction inflation probably continue to get better is your thinking?
Yeah, I mean, in the last 4 years, everything spiked like crazy with COVID, and then in the last year, it kind of leveled off. With new changes and things coming, we'll see. There could be some added costs here and some lower costs there that kind of tend to balance things out. I think the extreme ends of especially things like mechanical and electrical equipment should subside. They were jumping 20% a year. That's kind of unheard of. So that real sharp increase in cost should level out. And again, to my earlier point, we'll see a lot of that over the next 6 months, a year, and be able to plan for that. And if anything does change, we can come back and certainly update the board.
So do you feel that if you would shrink this building or whatever this path, because once you go down this architectural path, right, we're not going to go back to keeping the wing now. You can shrink it and still be effective if it comes to that?
Yeah, we talked a lot about with Mr. Brosman. There's a line of how small that building can become until you still need Franklin. So we could keep shrinking it, shrinking and shrinking it, and then it's like, oh, now we made it too small, we have to keep Franklin. So there's that line. We have to find that line, and we think we know where that is to at least replace that.
Okay.
And then it's how much bigger do we want to go? And make sure that we are building that ready for, 2028 when everything opens, or 29. When everything opens and we go, yep, this is the right amount. And if things keep growing, here's a way that 3-story wing can easily be expanded in the future. We can set up things like that, and often do during construction, where maybe the last 8, 9 classrooms are a bidding alternate. They'd be nice, we could certainly use them, but we don't absolutely need them on day one. So let's have that as an alternate. So the price comes in for construction and it says it's X amount of money. And for an additional $2 million, you could build these other 9 classrooms. And we can come back to the board and say, hey, everything came in on budget. Even adding that 2 million, we're still on budget. Those classrooms 10 years from now aren't going to be $2 million. They're going to be a lot more. We think it's a good idea to do that, or to say, hey, you know what? Things came in a little over where we are. We can't build those other classrooms now in order to stay on budget. So there'll be some bidding alternates and some bidding strategies along the way to make sure that we have a few decisions to make on bid day where we can go, yeah, you know what? We'll take this. Maybe we'll pass on that because that number came in a little high, to make sure we can stay on budget.
And I, to Mr. Walden's point, I was originally for a different option until we had some additional conversations here around that possibility and through the planning process. So that's why, at least in my opinion, this was not team, this was just me speaking, that starting to look at the bigger end, and then what could that look like, and what does those options, because if you get too close to that line, then why would you just not do the other one? And so that's why it makes sense when we talked internally to start at option 3 and see where that gets us, and what does it look like with bids and planning to see, is it the most viable, and does it make sense financially at that point?
The other part of that we didn't talk about was the disruption and the need for the continuity of the education process. And it's going to be much more disruptive for the students if we choose an option that's not that option 3 at the 211, and we go to the 181 and we try to save Franklin. Now you're talking about trailers, you're talking about other problems, and you're also not going to gain the efficiencies of a new building, the lighting, and a lot of the other things. And those are all things we can't really quantify, but you're going to get more efficiencies. You're going to have less maintenance that needs to be done. There's just a lot of other things that we don't get to add into this number as far as savings go over the long haul.
Mr. Keener.
Mrs. Hall, the contract that we're going to vote on tonight, the faculty contract,
Yes.
if that passes, and we don't know yet if it will or not, but if that contract passes, please remind me what percent tax increase there will be in each year solely to pay for the new contract.
So it's going to vary by year, but on
It's
average,
isn't it like 1.9 something per year?
it's a little over 2%.
2 point,
It's a little over 2%. It's going to vary by year, but on
I'm sorry,
average.
yeah, could you give me literally
For
year
each
by
year.
year what that
All right.
is?
Back to you. I need a minute.
Okay, and then also the previous information that you provided about assuming that we give the administration and the support staff the same increase that we give to the faculty, there was some additional tax increase that would be required for that.
I just want to make a point that part of this, if we go down this road with this big project, is talking to the community and explaining that additional increase is a temporary thing until we develop our ability to borrow that much money over 5 years. So it's not just something we incur on the community without, the administration and others and the architect, talking about why we're doing this. We just don't say, hey, your taxes are higher, take it or leave it. we get the community to understand why we're doing this. And quite frankly, if we don't do it, we delay this longer, it's going to cost us a lot more. If we'd have had a crystal ball, we'd have done this 5 years ago, we'd have spent a lot less than we're looking at spending. So it's not going to get any cheaper.
It looks just, I'm, we'll wait to get the numbers. Year 1 and 2, I think we can afford this. Years 3 and 4, I think we run out of taxing authority before we solve this problem, but I want to hear the numbers before I say that definitively.
I think you're right, Mr. Grant, in a way, no matter what we look at this, because this doesn't include inflation, all that stuff, there's gonna have to be concessions overall and tightening of the overall budget regardless.
So, and again, it would have been helpful to have seen this all together, so we don't have to sit here on the fly and do spreadsheets in the middle of a meeting.
I think we have looked at this ad nauseum, and I'm not trying to be difficult, but I don't feel like I need another tutorial with this. We've been mulling over this data for a long time.
No, but this is the first time we've seen the new remaining taxing authority on this new figure, but it's still not overlaid with the incremental cost of the contract, the incremental cost of administration and support staff salaries.
Well, I think what you have to remember, that's part of the reason that, and you've pushed for this as well, so have I, that we put some money aside so that we can draw from that to make up that balance. And you don't draw from that all at once. You draw from that slowly over those years when our taxing authority is maxed out. So I do believe it's affordable. I don't believe it's going to be easy. I never suggested that. I do believe we need to look at our expenses and how we run the district and look at opportunities to trim expenses within the district in a more purposeful way than we have in the past.
Does this include the anticipated draws from the
No.
capital reserve fund?
I don't think so. I don't want to speak for Mrs. Hall, but I'm 99% no. This just includes what it would cost if we had no savings and we didn't draw from any of that to put towards our expenses.
It's worst case scenario if we're borrowing for the entire amount.
I'm sorry?
I said it's worst case scenario as if we're borrowing for the entire amount. So it does not include any of the 50 million that we have in cap reserve.
And I understand how you're looking down the road, Mr. Keener, like not next year, not the year after that, but having 2 years of something solid, I think is really what we need to get this jump started and get it going. And then we have decisions to make but this, we have talked about this over and over again, and the cost is only going to go up. So I feel
That may
confident with
be
the 2-year
But we
projection.
still have not seen an integrated, we're getting bits and snippets of information. We're not seeing everything together. And how the new contract, the potential new contract, how all of that overlays with this. And maybe there's an answer to it, but so far we haven't seen it.
I think you just have to do a little math and you have to look at the percentage that it's going to cost to cover that bond. And you have to look at the percentage that it's going to cost for the contract year over year. And then you have to look at what's left and you have to marry that up with the other responsibilities of the
That's what we're
district.
trying to do. That's why Mrs.
Well,
So-
we talked about the 50 million, using that for all the other projects. You know, if push comes to shove, maybe we delay a couple of those and put some of that money towards this to reduce the amount that we borrow. I mean, I think the board wasn't in favor of that, but that'd be something we could look at. I'm not saying all of it, but there could be something we delay a year or two.
I'm in
guess-
favor
I
of-
guess Part of the problem we're in this position is the
We
fact
delayed
that
it.
when the prototypes were built, there was no planning for the high school. I mean, I've heard that, and basically the high school was left aside. And if we delay LMS and LPC to use, no, we're not going to use all $50 million, but I think it's like 35, 36 million. So there's 14 or 15 million that's still left over, plus whatever we could contribute to that. Yeah, I could see that going to the high school, but to delay those projects, then a future board's going to be stuck in the same position we are. They're going to have 2 buildings that the recommendation's going to be to rebuild or drastically tear down and do that. So I am for this 211 million, but in the condition that we continue with the other projects with it. Because again, that to me does not make sense for future boards.
I mean, I think just my gut feel talking to Mike Kelly and others, construction inflation is typically going to be higher than inflation. So, you know, the longer we wait, I did a ballpark estimate. If we go 5 years to delay this project, if we assume construction inflation is 5%, you're talking about another 55, 60 million. And
And
instead of
again,
two
Mr.
hundred eleven
Mayor,
million, we
I'm
got
for it,
270 million by delaying it. So it's going to cost us more and the community more, the more we push this down the road.
And Mr., I'm not for delaying it. I am.
No, I understand.
For the project. Because again, you could apply the same thing. If we stop doing
other way.
renovations to LMS,
Yeah.
it's gonna cost that much more 5 or 6 years down the road for those. And again, the buildings are being, right now, we're talking about renovations basically to keep them the way they are without doing any further damage, correct, with the things that you guys recommended for LMS and LPC.
And the other thing.
Yeah, that was, I think we started at around 80 million and just from going over and over and taking out all the things that really didn't, I think we're down in the 35, 36.
Yeah.
But that really is kind of these are the things you
These are-
really do need to
I mean,
address
it's
soon.
basically to me like your house, you're replacing the roof on your house, and when the heating air conditioning system goes out, you replace that, and you know, the water heater when it's the same type of thing on
Yeah,
a
there
larger
there wasn't a
scale.
lot of wants in that at that
Right.
point. That was down to like the
The
building
other-
envelope structure.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's more or less the guarantee that 15 or 20 years from now that you could possibly renovate or
Yeah. And that was also over a 3-year period.
period, right?
And the other thing, that 55, 60 million I threw out for delaying it for 5 years, that's not including any significant expenses if we have some major problems with the high school. So that's probably on the conservative side.
I appreciate everyone's opinion, but can we give the architects some direction? Or
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Or other board members thought?
I haven't spoken yet, but I think I've made it clear previously, the option 3 that the majority here sounds like they're in favor of is also the one that I think is the most prudent. What is needed as well as the most fiscally responsible moving forward to set future boards up. And just to deal with what we need to deal with now to give our students, our teachers and our community the building that they deserve, the building that our kids need. And to not be revisiting the same situation 10 years from now, trying to fix an old Franklin that might still be standing.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said. Frankly, I think Mr. Wogelmuth and Mr. Maris summed it up well. When I first saw, I'm with you. I think option 3, the 211 was what, 231 at one point, right? And I thought myself, I'd love to do that, but I don't see it happening. I can see it happening now, and I think it's been said, and I totally agree that it's the way to go. I think it makes the most sense. I think it's the most reasonable. I think it's the bang for the buck. I think it's going to set us up well for the future. Things are going to get tight, right? We're going to have to make some decisions. We're going to have to be vigilant over what we do. There's no question. You know, the days of 1.1% tax increase, those days are done for, right? Let's be honest. At least I'll speak for myself on that. But to Mr. Wogelman's point as well, which he also said last year, I also tend to agree with as well, where you know, a good, solid, steady number there to build in millage and do this properly is probably the right way to go. So as far as I'm concerned, option 3 at 211 for me is the winner.
Mrs. Johnson? Sorry, but
No, I thought option 3 was the 181 and option 2 was the 211.
No,
I've
no.
got them
All right,
reversed.
option 2 at 211 or option 3 at 211, you choose.
Hybrid, I like to call it the
option,
hybrid
okay.
option. They named that previous meeting.
I mean, I was.
The hybrid
operating
versus
my
a
mind, so
number
You
gets confusing.
were saying
Tomato
2 and
tomato.
3.
Yeah.
Okay. I've made it clear, we need to exercise good stewardship. We need to be fiscally responsible. And we still had to put money away, everything that everybody's already said. So we've got to do what we've got to do. So we've got to take care of our property. Is that what you wanted to know?
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm assuming from this, there's actually 5 people at this point that have the consensus is to go go on. And again, this is just a consensus. This is not a vote, but it's to get the architect to draw up a little better plans than what we're seeing up there. And I do agree with Mr. Maris. We have to take it to the public because we are going to be, whoever's on the board, assuming this continues, we have to sell it to the public.
And
Oh.
that's gonna start, as I understood the calendar, like late winter, that we would
How
start
long,
having some public meetings.
how long would it take to get something presentable for the public?
There are a lot of steps now from the word go.
Okay.
I think the initial one that you were looking for is, as we said, a little bit more refined drawings of what we showed before, a little bit more of a, what does it look like? Make sure we count all the rooms and have everything kind of looking in the right direction, and look for maybe a winter time, say February meeting with on a buildings and grounds meeting, focused on the building to present that to the community and kind of say, hey, here's that schematic design of what we're talking about. Here's what's included. Here's what this would look like. Here's what some of Buchanan would look like as part of the renovation process, and kind of go from there. I think as what you're going to start spending money on is the documentation of that, the engineering of that, the testing of those things. We talked a little bit about soil testing and some of the areas that we would be looking to build the building. So that may be something that happens in the spring once the ground thaws. So
I would probably recommend to do that earlier than later,
Sure.
so that we
Yeah.
don't find out the plan is not, because of what we had happen
Sure,
with
we do boring testing
was
now and the
actually gonna be my question.
infiltration testing in this.
Yeah.
So we could do the boring testing now because that'll let us know if there's sinkholes or any major problems. The infiltration testing can happen in the spring. That's just
Okay.
how water gets through the soil.
Okay.
So that's a good point. And so those are all things that we, together with John, can go through, put those things together, and start to show you that month by month menu. It's essentially, let's say at least what we want to be at this point next year, is having, pretty much ready to go out to bid in, say, January of 26, or early in 26 with construction drawings for that project. So again, the word go tonight is still 12, 13, 14 months of updates and design and going forward and going backwards and coming back again. And, a lot of integration with your staff, as we've done before, with teachers and students and community members throughout this process. So we'll put a schedule together to share with you for next time.
I'll jump in just one last thing, and as a second to Mr. Maris, I think it's a fair comment, and frankly, it's a vital comment, as vital as anything we do here. I remember about a year ago, maybe a little over a year ago, I was sitting in an informal meeting, just shooting the bull with a couple folks in the community, and somebody, wasn't me, threw out the number of, about 140 million bucks, and the gentleman across the table from me pretty much choked on his coffee. And here we are, 70 million to the good of that, right, to the north of that. And so I think Mrs. Burkholder, I think there's going to be some work to be done, right, from a communication standpoint. I think making sure that we are staying very close with you all, making sure that we know every single step of this process, the what, the why, the how, the what is next, the what ifs, I think is going to be frankly imperative. There's 53,000 people in this district, in this community that we answer to. So as far as I'm concerned, I think it's a valid point, and frankly, it's more than valid. So I'll second that thought, and we got to be good on this.
And I think we'll be able to show ourselves and the community that financially it makes sense because of the time value of money and because of the condition of the buildings and because of the other options. And I'm actually going to stick my neck out tonight, and maybe 5 years from now, you guys can call me out if I'm wrong, but I'm going to say we're going to do this. If we go through with this, we're going to do it under 211 million, and we're going to do it. We're going to get a better bond than we're predicting now. So that's just my prediction.
Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Keener?
Mrs. Hall, I actually went back and found the emails that had that information. So
Yep, I got.
assuming that information has not changed, next year we would have 0.42%, 42 basis points remaining. The following year, we have 6 basis points, 0.06 remaining. Starting 3 years from now, we're 0.31% in the hole. 4 years from now, we're 0.48% in the hole. In other words, if we go with this option at $210 million, if we pass the teacher's contract, and if we give the support staff and administration a 3% raise, we are in the hole against our Act One taxing authority 3 years from now.
I don't,
Not necessarily.
That's,
So
those are the numbers.
just a couple,
given.
I have to go back. I didn't calculate them that way, because it does
So-
vary year by year. But let me just make a couple points. One, they are projected indexes. I don't know for sure. It's what the
Yeah, I mean,
IFO is
I can
provided.
Show you where I got these
No,
from.
I believe you.
well,
Number two, that's assuming no new state money. ever
Pardon me?
again. It's assuming we don't get any additional state money and that we have no increase in our assessed value. So there are other factors at play that are very likely to offset this. While it's
Right.
not a guarantee.
Right, and it's
They are
also
factors.
assumes.
can you pull that table up with the borrowing debt service? Because I don't know how you're coming up with that grant, because the additional amount for the teacher's contract is around 2%.
2.09% taxing authority just for the new contract, right?
So on average,
What?
it
On
will
average.
vary by year.
It's 0.48%, assuming 3% per year for the support staff and administration. So together, that's 2.57% of a tax increase. So if we look at the chart that was up there and subtract 2.57 from the bottom number, the math becomes pretty clear. We are into the negative in taxing authority 3 years from now, which means we have to reduce programs, cut expenses by 0.31% to balance the budget.
Respectfully, that's 3 years from now, and we do budgets year to year.
I don't,
That is 3 years from now. And I
Yes.
appreciate your calculations on the fly and things, but we have, those will be worked through. But we have to start, and we have 2 years of solid information of where we can go.
I'd like Mrs. Hall to do those calculations. I don't know where you're coming up with the 0.48 additional. So
What, the 0.4?
So that's if all the support
Mrs. Hall
staff.
gave me data that
Yep,
says
that's
that
correct.
each 1% increase to support staff and administration salary flows through the 0.16% of a tax increase. 0.16 times 3 is 0.48.
That's right.
okay. You're saying that for 1 year or multiple years?
Annually.
That's assuming, and again, that's assuming that we would give an average increase to the administration and support staff of 3% a year, which I would point out is less than the increase which the proposed contract calls to give to the faculty. I mean, this is data that we have, and it's data that all of us have heard before.
I think it's a calculated risk, Mr. Keener, but for the long-term benefit of the district, it's the right decision to take that calculated risk. There are some things that will help to soften that, but do I believe we're going to have to be vigilant with our spending and look at ways to trim the fat, for lack of a better term, and find ways to cut expenses. But I do believe those numbers won't look quite as bad as what they do today. And there's a lot of reasons I could get into as to why I believe that. But to your point, I understand as it looks right now, practically, it's a little unnerving when you look at that. But I do believe we'll be able to close that gap to a degree as we move forward. I disagree with Mrs. Eshelman that you can only look at 1 year. You have to look long-term when you look at this, and you have to make decisions for the 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So I completely disagree that we just do a budget for this year and just put blinders on related to the future.
I didn't say that.
But
I'm
at the
saying
end of
you'll
the
make it
day,
easier.
let me finish, please. But at the end of the day, I do think it's a calculated risk that we should take and we need to take for the good of the district. It's wise use of the tax dollars for the long haul related to this building that we know has to be replaced.
And I
just
want to
go off
also
of
make
that,
the,
Again, with the money we have $50 million. There's about $38 million already spent. Even if you put some more inflation in that, it goes up to 40 million. There's still 10 million there that we could use for the high school. That's not.
and your question is another 0.48%. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor.
0.48%?
Again, I'm going off of
You're
the
correct.
number that Mrs. Hall said,
Correct.
that each
I have-
1% increase to support staff and administration salary equates to a 0.16% tax increase. Okay,
Per year?
per year. Okay.
And that's how many dollars
Times
per year?
three. Assume, because I don't think anyone here is suggesting that we want to only give the support staff a 1% raise. Times 3 is 0.48%. When you add that to the 2.09.
I got you there, Grant.
That the new contract is gonna cost, that adds up to a 2.547% tax increase.
What is 0.48% in dollars per year?
About 430,000.
And I'll say to you, I've been on the board a long time, and traditionally, we almost always do better than the budget projects, occasionally not. So I think $480,000 doesn't, obviously, we'll have to watch our expenses, but as Mr. Donato said, we have 10 million, and I'm telling you, we're gonna do better, and we'll probably get grants, so that doesn't scare me.
I'm glad to hear that we're making decisions based on hopes and prayers right now.
It's not hopes and prayers, Grant.
So, Mr. Mayor, so one of the things, remember, about 2 years or 3 years ago, we stopped putting $1 million buffer in the budget.
I understand that. I'm
So
not talking about that.
Right, but so that also inflated we always come in under budget, right? Because we always should have come in $1 million under budget. Because that was a buffer zone. I agree with a lot of things that are said, like, we do have to look at the long 5-10 year plan. We have to realize that even the Centerville Elementary, at 10 years, we may not be able to address, right? We may have to deal with what we got. We do need to be prudent with money. This is the 210 is definitely the bang for the buck. It's the best, definitely the best option, but we have a lot of stakeholders, right? The teacher's contract, the people that, cook our food, administration, the taxpayers, because everything we do affects the taxpayers, right? So we got a lot of stakeholders and you just have to balance it. And if we go down, whatever path we go down, we are going to have to cut and be prudent about every dollar we spend, and everybody's, project is going to have to be weighed against the other people's project.
So Mrs. Hall, in year 29-30, we won't have that debt service additional additional increase, because we'll have brought ourselves up to be able to borrow that additional amount. Am I correct? But in other words, the 1 point,
No, we're phasing it in through 29-30.
No,
Right.
it goes the whole way to if you look at the dollars, about $18 million from now until 2053 is $18 million we pay to debt services, period. End
Right.
of story.
But the millage build-in is done in the 5 years.
Yes, yeah, millage is.
That's
Yep.
what Mr. Maris
Yep.
was trying to say.
I will add to that, not
there's,
being here, but again, what we're talking about with that $38 million is 3 buildings basically to fix up the prototype buildings like Worstown, and we've added air conditioning system, but they're going to need a new roof. The prototype buildings are wear out, where we won't have to, whoever's on the board, where they won't have to borrow that kind of money. You've got to keep projecting ahead that we're going to have to do things for those other buildings too.
This is a time for the high school because all the roofs and air conditioning have been replaced.
Right.
In 25 years from now, we're doing all that
Again.
all over again. So what is that going to probably be 50 million by that time? Replace all the roofs and air conditioning. So 25 years from now, we have all that again.
So what I'm hearing from this is then the consensus is to continue with the plans for the 211 million. We're not voting for anything. This does not mean that, they're going out to doing plans to get bids and stuff. He'll bring it back. It sounds like the earliest, even if you do this, if you're doing a year from now to get bids, a year after that, and 3 years to build, you're talking 2029 before it's finished.
Yeah, I would think. I think you'd want to be in the ground in the spring of 26, to be done in 29. So some of that.
Mr. Kelly, could you use the microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Some of that'll be the building of the building, and some of that'll be taking down of Franklin.
Right.
But yeah, so I think you may have kids in that new facility in 28, but you're still taking part of Franklin down.
I do have one question, because the Franklin House will be used until everything is done. When you're remodeling the Buchanan House, I'm assuming that'll be done in one large shot, so kids won't be in there. So you'll have kids on this side and kids on this side, and it would be nice, but I wouldn't, assuming Dr. Brosman's there, I wouldn't expect him to plan to just have 9th and 10th graders or 11th and 12th graders in Franklin House and the rest of the kids there. That won't even work because you have.
Yeah, if you think about it, there'll be a period of time.
What happens when it's winter time and it's 30 degrees out and they have to get from there to there?
Yeah, there'll be a period of time where you'll have a high school and a half. So we can, you think of it as 3 buildings now. Everybody can go to Franklin for a little while parts of Buchanan are renovated. We're also gonna have 4 summers along the way.
Okay.
So in looking at phasing and really how a new HVAC system would be installed in Buchanan, a lot of that can happen over the summers. So, the goal will be to, we always say minimize disruption. We're not eliminating it, it's minimized.
Yeah.
But what's nice is you would have Franklin there until we take it down, if we need to use a few classrooms there while some other things in Buchanan are being addressed. And it would be all enclosed. It'd be a long walk, but it would be all enclosed, certainly in a weather condition.
Probably need more than 5 minutes to do that long. You could maybe go up to 5.5. That could
We
be
have that happen a lot where they have to modify the period times because of construction, kids have to walk so far.
That could be their PE class. They can
And-
move back and forwards.
And while it may sound scary to borrow money out through 2053, the reality is because of inflation, the time value of money, those bond payments 10, 15, 20 years from now are going to be a lot less. So, and the ability to borrow money is actually a good thing, and schools traditionally get lower interest than like ourselves with mortgages. So it's actually a good thing that we can borrow at a really good interest rate. And if you look at the time value of money, it's actually a pretty darn good investment.
I don't want to belabor the discussion, but I do have one question for anybody there. When do you need an answer on the stadium to wrap it into this if we would choose to go down that road? I think we know it needs help desperately. And so if you're going to wrap it into this project, you're probably going to help us save dollars if you can build it into everything that's being done while equipment's already here. When do you need an answer on that?
It's kind of a little, and some of the ones that we put out for bid, we did a combined bid option. There's an upside and a downside. The downside is with a project as big as your high school, you're not going to have as many contractors that can bond that big of a job. So you lose some of the competitiveness. A stadium jobs will get 10 GCs. A high school of this size, 2, 3, just because of bonding capabilities and the size of the companies. Let me work on that with the team and get back to you with the answer, because there is a combined bid option where we just did one now for a district in Lebanon County where the contractor that got the big one was given an option, even though the stadium upgrades were put out separately, was given an option. Hey, if you get the stadium, if you get the package, what will you save us? And he actually became a little better on both that way. So it is an option, but I'd have to do some legwork on that.
I think Mr. Wogelmuth brings up a good point. I think we need to have more meetings to define that better, because we spent a lot of time in the high school and the other repairs. There's a bunch of questions that were thrown out and you just gave us preliminary numbers, but possibly at the December buildings and ground in a few weeks, maybe we can meet again, talk about it again, and then the January meeting, because if we are going to wrap it in, we probably need to define it fairly soon.
Or at least provide that as an option. If we can wrap it in and look at it in both ways, might be the best option.
Yes.
Any other questions?
So we are going to table the recommendation until we hear this.
No,
wrapping
no, we're
idea.
moving ahead with
I'm not recommending we table anything related to the 211 in the high school. I'm just recommending that I wasn't recommending anything. I was asking a question as to whether, or with a timeline, what it would take to wrap it in. Because if you're going to go to the community with a project, it'd be nice to be able to go to the community with all of this together, even if separate contractors doing those jobs, and present to the community in one fell swoop.
So Mike, you have what you need to be able to come back, more information. John, you have what you need as well. Great. All right. Thank you for being here. In terms of the rest of the superintendent's report, you see the calendar of events for the rest of the meetings this month. Also, in board news this week, I will also include the list of all of the winter concerts that are in all of our buildings. So if you're able to attend any of those, absolutely wonderful events. So please try if you can. And then you have the enrollment report that is attached, and that concludes the superintendent's report.
For the president's report, I was going to ask if it's possible, Mr. Bawerski's going to put out a list. I know the kids appreciate it. The staff appreciates it. If you can attend any of the winter concerts that go on, I believe they actually start because the orchestra concert's tomorrow night. I do know that because I'll be attending that one as a parent, but if you can, that would be great with it. So we're going to move on then to the representative and adjunct reports. Lancaster County Career and Technology Center, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. The JOC did not meet in November. Our next meeting, our reorganization meeting is this coming Monday in Willow Street.
Thank you. IU13, Mr. Maris.
I did meet, but there was nothing extremely noteworthy, so no new items to report.
Okay, thank you. Hempfield Rec.
I was unable to attend the last meeting. I don't know if Mr. Wagner was able to be there.
I was, so I'll be quick with this. We did have a meeting on November the 20th. We had a discussion around the strategic planning update and what we're doing on the strategic planning side. That is ongoing. I'll have more updates as time progresses. In fact, I'll even be in a meeting tomorrow to discuss that further. So a lot to discuss there on the strategic planning side of things for Hart. We also discussed and approved the 2025 budget, as well as started to discuss board members, future board members, and nominations for those seats that are forthcoming, that are open. So that is it for now.
Thank you. Safety and Security, Mr. Garber.
All the administrative people had some training with the local fire department. The local fire chief, he came in, did some emergency response training. Other than that, it's been quiet.
And we did not get this to you today because I literally just got it. But we received notification from East Hempfield Township Police Department that Officer Brown, our second SRO, will officially begin on January 2nd at the middle schools. So we're excited about that.
I'm sorry, I have a question for Mr. Wagner. I didn't get my hand up in time. You mentioned the board members for Hempfield Rec.
Yes,
Is the plan that we still will continue to have two board members?
it is. Yeah, Mrs. Brady and I will still continue to
I'm
serve on
sorry?
it. It is. Yes, Mrs. Brady and I will continue to serve on that board.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
so
there's
yes,
no
we will still have
discussion
two.
of the overall composition changing.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. PSBA, Mrs. Eshelman.
Nothing new.
Okay. Going on to standing committees, there was no buildings and grounds. The next meeting for that will be December 17th. And finance, there was no finance meeting in November. The next meeting for that will be December 17th. Going on to education and programs, Mrs. Johnston.
Our last meeting, Dr. Dandridge made a presentation of the state assessments. If you want more information, it's posted. Our next meeting is December the 12th in this room at 5 o'clock.
Going on, policy, personnel, and legal, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. Policy, personnel, and legal also met on November 21st. There were about 8 or 9 policies advanced for second reading consideration. And I apologize. I'm gonna have to, at this point, make a motion to amend this agenda or these minutes because they are not correct, and I just now saw that. The minutes from, that we voted on earlier, I apologize, I misread this. Okay, never mind. I see what was done here. Okay. It was formatted differently than it's normally formatted, and that threw me off. The policies that we are voting on are listed on the agenda for today's meeting. And I apologize for confusing everyone because I just read this incorrectly.
That's perfectly okay. Okay. Moving on to personnel action items, which we will be doing these separately. So item 9B, which is the personnel action items. Actually, we're going to do those. It's finance, sorry. We're going to do B and C together. So I need a motion to approve that. For personnel action items, I believe there's 9 of them, and then returning volunteers for sports and different activities. So motion to approve 9B and C.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms.
Second,
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, carries 9-0. Going on now, financial items. This one we're going to do separately. 9A, the contracts. Want to take a look at that. The contracts, these were things that been discussed previously and had also been in board news with this. Need a motion to approve the 3 contracts.
So moved.
Thank you. Mrs. Brady,
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Wagnus with the second. All those in favor? Okay. Carries 9-0. And item B, moving on to do the collective bargaining agreement to approve that with HEA that begins July 1st of this year and goes on through June 30th of 2028. Need a motion to approve that.
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Brady. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Discussion?
Yeah, I have a couple comments to make before we take a vote. It's probably not going to change the outcome of this, but the word that comes to mind that's going to preface everything that I say is balance. And the district has typically in the past underfunded facilities. You heard our discussion tonight, and positions that have not been part of the bargaining unit. These areas still remain critical to the district's well-being and the function of this district. And we've not provided the resources to those areas traditionally over the years. So that being said, we also have a responsibility to the taxpayers and to use those dollars wisely and appropriately. And for that reason, you'll find my vote tonight for this contract will be no.
Any other comments, Mr. Keener?
I also will be unable to support this contract as it's written. My reasoning is different than Mr. Walgamuth's in certain ways. I made clear 18 months ago to Mr. Janata and some of his colleagues that I believe that our current contract had baked in inefficiencies that prevent us from fully recognizing the contributions that our faculty make to our educational endeavor. I think that we spend a lot of money, and it likely is in the 7 figures every year, on inefficient legacy practices that do nothing to advance our educational mission and that divert money from properly rewarding the faculty. I also repeatedly, in my 9 years on the board, have encouraged my colleagues to take a clean sheet approach to these negotiations, to abandon some of the legacy practices which create these inefficiencies, and to properly compensate our faculty for the excellent job that they do. This contract, unfortunately, does none of those things. We have, with all due respect to the hard work of our colleagues who negotiated it, and I thank them. I thank Mr. Donato, Mr. Wagner, and Mr. Walgamuth for the countless hours that they spent on this contract. And please do not interpret my comment as any sort of denigration of your hard work. And I would say the same thing to Mr. Janata and his colleagues on the union side. You spent a lot of time on this, and I appreciate that. In my opinion, this contract does nothing to solve the systemic inefficiencies at Hempfield School District and in public education writ large. We cannot solve every problem here, but we don't even try when we have the opportunity, to negotiate a contract that begins to properly recognize the faculty and break down these inefficiencies, we have not made a meaningful attempt to do that. And for that reason, I will be voting no.
Any other comments?
I'm gonna piggyback on both comments. Let's talk about balance. Like we talked about earlier, it's balancing different stakeholders, right? So we got to balance the stakeholders. Overwhelmingly, the teachers have benefit from out of balance, right? So we know that they're number one in pay. We also know that our math scores I lost my exact numbers, but it's average like 53% nationwide or average or above. We're average. Our reading scores are roughly around 68% on our average, right? Like I said, I don't have the exact numbers with me right now. Yet our teachers are paid number one in the district, right? So then go to Mr. Grant's perspective of we got to balance, right? If we want to have incentive, if we want to be the top paid, we need to have top performance. So I take a little bit of both those when I look at the contract, and we have neglected facilities and extra support staff. We have support staff that's still making $13 an hour. The people that prepare our food are just as important as teachers. And I know that's going to take it wrong, but food safety, and if we have an outbreak of listeria or something like that with our kids or salmonella, we will have a rash of kids. So no faculty that we have is less valued than others. They're all valued 100% the same. Every person has their job. So let me rephrase this to make sure everybody's clear. Everybody has the same value. I'm not belittling one group or another, but everybody has the same value in the mission of the school district.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, with that. we'll
I
take-
request a roll call vote.
Okay,
Yeah, I would also request that.
Mrs. Hall?
Got it. Okay. Mrs. Brady,
Yes.
Mr. Donato,
Yes.
Mrs. Eshelman,
Yes.
Mr. Garber,
No.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Keener,
No.
Mr. Maris,
Yes.
Mr. Wagner,
Yes.
Mr. Wogomuth.
No.
Motion passes 6-3.
6-3. Okay, moving on to item C, resolution for the 25-26 budget. This is the resolution that says the most we will raise taxes. We won't ask for the special education exemption. That the most taxes will go up to will be the index, which I believe is 4.8%, correct? And we won't be requesting the special education exception. So need a motion to approve that, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Wagelman. Second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any questions? If you do, you can direct them to Mrs. Hall. That's limit to my knowledge of what we were doing with that. Okay, no questions. All those in favor? Okay, motion carries 9-0. There's no buildings and grounds action items. Approval of other action items, and this will do all at once. First reading, as Mr. Keener said, of board policies, first and second reading, more additional transportation staff so we can get the kids here, and one student expulsion. So need a motion to approve those, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. A second.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
The expulsion, is that the same one that was addressed in board news 2 weeks ago? This is not a new one. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? All those in favor? Okay, I believe that carries 9-0. And with that, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. All those in favor? We're not having discussion. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you. Have a good evening.